So hello, welcome to the video and welcome to Folkestone Central Railway Station, the starting point of many epic adventures and of quite a few not quite so epic ones. I'm starting my own epic adventure today, 4-destination holiday, business trip, holiday, I don't know, I'll let you decide. Taking me to 3 places I've never been before that I'm quite excited to visit. Now the last epic trip I embarked upon was my Round the World in 8 Days saga, and I ended up making an overarching video about that entire experience. And I quite enjoyed making it, and people seem to quite enjoy watching it. So despite the fact that this video doesn't have quite the same impelling factor driving it forwards, I thought I'd make an overall video about this trip too. It allows me to share some of the destinations I'm visiting with you, but doesn't really require me to make a full destination video about these places, which nobody ends up watching anyway. So today I'm flying down to Madrid, where I'm positioning for a flight down to Bogota in Colombia, after which I'll be going to San Andres Island, which is still part of Colombia, although it's in the Caribbean Sea, quite close to Nicaragua. From there I'll be going to Mexico City, and then my 4th stop is the magical destination of Manchester. And that may sound a bit weird, but the reason for stopping there will make itself apparent as the video goes along. Never been to those first 3 places before, so as I said, I'm really excited to get there. And if you'd like to see what the experience is like, stick around.
Hi, I'm Matt. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.4 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe to see where I go next and perhaps get some inspiration for your next trip. Hand baggage only, of course, for this 8-night trip. My slightly odd combination of destinations was built around my desire to experience Iberia's business class product using an American Express 2-for-1 voucher. These only used to be valid for BA flights, but they were recently extended to also be valid on Iberia and Aer Lingus. I'd initially targeted a visit to El Salvador, but I dithered and the seat I had my eye on disappeared, so I settled on Bogota as my destination. I could have added the flight down to Madrid onto the same booking, but that would have triggered the long-haul air passenger duty plus other fees, so it was slightly cheaper to book a flight down to Madrid separately, even taking into account the cost of a night of a hotel in Madrid. It's always a delight to use the first wing at Heathrow, although Iberia only relocated to the terminal a week or 2 before I travelled. When I booked, they were operating from Terminal 3, so I had been excited about experiencing the array of excellent lounges you can find there, but a video about that experience will have to wait. This was early June, which seems to coincide with Britain's summer this year, so there was a freak rainstorm which wreaked havoc on the airport. The downpour only lasted for 10 or so minutes, but my flight ended up being delayed for nearly 3 hours. It wasn't handled very well, it has to be said, so much of that time was spent crammed into the hot and sweaty gate area. I picked this flight as it gave me the chance to fly on Iberia's A350. It's always fun to fly a wide-body plane on a short-haul route. And as Iberia doesn't sell their premium economy cabin on this route, I was able to use my status to grab a seat in the cabin despite only being booked into economy. When we finally arrived in Madrid, I stayed at the Senator Barajas Hotel, close-ish to the airport. I ended up with Euro-styled twin beds. The rest of the room was a little retro, with lots of dark wood, but it was comfortable enough. About £80 for the night, which was decent value for an airport hotel here. I picked it as the hotel was pretty close to a train station, giving access to central Madrid.
So not a brilliant night's sleep here in Madrid, it has to be said. Didn't get to bed until about 2 AM. The plan had been to get myself up quite early to take the underground train into central Madrid and wander around for a couple of hours. But given that I have a fairly big flight today that I want to cover fully for you on the channel, I thought setting an alarm and confining myself to only 4 or 5 hours sleep wasn't a brilliant idea. So we've had to torpedo Madrid, but it does mean that I'm sort of okay, refreshed and ready to experience today's flight. So, off to the airport.
The hotel runs a courtesy bus to and from the terminals, but I'd missed the last one to the hotel due to the late arrival of the plane, which cost me €25 in a taxi. I was able to take the courtesy bus back across to Terminal 4. Terminal 4 is large, but it's quite nice, with a very pleasant lounge, which was fortunate as we ended up with a 3-hour delay here, giving me plenty of time to enjoy it. That's close to 6 hours of delays across my 2 Iberia flights, and this delay was long enough to trigger an EU 261 claim. But eventually we were off, and I enjoyed the flight down to Bogota, as I share in this video. Iberia was a bit underwhelming on this 9-hour flight, but you can't question the value of a redemption with them. So Bogota. Arriving into an unfamiliar airport is always a little anxiety-inducing, but immigration was smooth and the ATM worked. You usually get a better rate once you're landside in the terminal and can get an even better rate from ATMs downtown, but I needed cash for a cab. Bogota airport taxis don't have a flawless reputation, but they shouldn't be feared, and my chap was perfectly friendly and courteous, even if he didn't speak a word of English. We had some challenges over understanding how the meter worked, if indeed it had at all, but I knew the rough cost, and he was perfectly happy to take 40,000 pesos. That was a little more than I could probably have haggled the fare down to, but it worked out to be £8, which was extremely good value for what ended up being a 45-minute ride. I stayed at the Hotel Dan on Avenida 19, close to the historic centre of Bogota in the La Capuchina district. It was one of the better rated properties in the area, but the £30 a night room rate suggested that this wouldn't be the Ritz. And it wasn't, but it was nice enough and had everything you need for a couple of nights. The rate included a modest breakfast too. Much flashier hotels are available, but I wanted to be within walking distance of the major sites, and the Hotel Dan worked well. The first thing that surprised me about Bogota was the weather. The city is 9,000 feet in the air, and I did notice that I ran out of puff a little sooner than I did at sea level, but the temperature was stuck in the teens and it was consistently drizzly. Pack accordingly if you go. But even in the gloom, central Bogota had a very European feel with wide streets and colonial architecture. This was still quite early, and the main square was still waking up. I was there just as the first alpacas showed up, ready to lure tourists into being photographed with them, for a fee, of course. Perhaps it was a llama. There was a very heavy police presence, including some guys in body armour that must have been modelled on a RoboCop movie. I didn't film them for obvious reasons, but it turned out that there were a number of demonstrations taking place around the corner, which I also decided it was best not to film. But I had a very pleasant stroll around the back streets, which were quite charming, and the extensive local markets. I don't drink coffee, but if that's your thing, I think you'd be overwhelmed by the options available to you. The headline attraction in the city is the Gold Museum, which I thought was exceptional and should be on everyone's to-do list when visiting. Colombia has a complex relationship with gold, and the museum handles the topic very well. Some of the artefacts on display are really remarkable. Entry is 70 pence, so it's pretty good value too, and is a particularly good option if it's raining. Bogota has a number of other museums and attractions, including a cable car up a nearby hill to a viewpoint. I took the view that this wouldn't be a great option that day, given the miserable weather. Bogota can't be described as a touristy city. There were plenty of Colombians visiting from the provinces, but very few international visitors. You could conclude this quite quickly from how little English was spoken. I'll never criticise anyone for not learning my language, but it was noticeable that there's no real need for people to speak English here, which is typical of a place which sees few international tourists. The weather means there isn't really a pavement culture, so bars and cafes are all inside venues, which makes it tricky to work out what they're offering from the street. This all meant that I found it a little tricky to find somewhere fun to hang out in the evening I was there. I did eventually find a small place called the Bogota Brewing Company, which was a microbrewery concept that did decent food. It's sometimes fun to just order at random, and although I knew I was getting a burger, I had no idea that the potato would be served this way. Those spuds were absolutely delicious. Bogota is also an up-and-coming place for digital nomads and for people looking for a second residence. I can't say the lifestyle attractions of Bogota were clear from what I saw, certainly not compared to a lot of other places which compete for the digital nomad dollar. But to be fair, I only saw the downtown historic area rather than the more modern areas better equipped to support those kinds of visitors. Speaking Spanish could well make all the difference here. So I'm at the airport and it's time to move on from Bogota. So what can I say about the place? Well, it's a bit gritty, it's a bit edgy, it's a little bit rough in parts. There's a lot of police. Almost every building has a private security team outside guarding the entrance.
The shopkeepers roll down some really heavy-duty metal screens at the end of each night, none of which really screams "come to Bogota and have a good time." It's also 9,000 feet up in the air, so the weather's been really quite cold, which doesn't lend itself to street-side cafes and bars. But I have enjoyed it. It is a fascinating place to visit, and although I'm not going to be rushing back, if my plans ever did give me the opportunity to spend some time here, I wouldn't be absolutely mortified at the prospect. But it is time to move on. Staying in Colombia, we're going somewhere that will definitely be a little warmer, it'll probably be a little wetter, but it should certainly be a lot prettier.
And that place was San Andres Island. I flew there on Colombia's national carrier Avianca, as you can see in this video. And I arrived into this tropical paradise to be met again with brooding grey skies and semi-regular drizzle. It was much warmer though. San Andres became Colombian in 1822, despite being closer to 4 Central American countries than it is to the Colombian mainland. And it became the 3rd airport from which I was able to walk to my accommodation, joining Gibraltar and Bonaire on that exclusive list. It also has its own place in the Travellers Century Club's territory list, as it is so remote from the mainland, which makes this territory number 139 for me. I stayed at the Hotel Casablanca, which is very well located right on the main beach in the island's main town. I was keen to have a bit of a resort-style experience, so had gone a bit crazy when choosing this place, for me at least, and I paid £120 a night. Considerably cheaper options were available. The room was nice enough, although it could have done with a seating area, and the hotel's facilities were generally very good. Breakfast was also included, which came with entertainment, which was a first for me. I found San Andres to be a little odd. It's a tropical island in the Caribbean with gorgeous beaches and inviting waters, both of which were a little less photogenic than I'd hoped as a result of the heavy overhead cloud cover. But it lacked a lot of the elements you normally find in tropical resorts, elements I guess I was expecting. There were very few bars. I've been looking forward to watching the sunset with a beer in my hand and sand between my toes, but that wasn't really an option. The one standalone bar I did find was in the middle of a shopping centre. I'd fancied picking a beachside restaurant offering the finest local seafood, and whilst there were a couple of options in that vein, they were both absolutely slated in online reviews and had terrible ratings on TripAdvisor. I actually ended up having pizza both nights I was there, different places, but this one was at least a seafood pizza. I chose highly rated locally owned places outside of the hotels, and both meals were excellent, not to mention being really good value. And on the second night, the heavens opened. They really opened. And they stayed open for quite some time. It was really quite entertaining both during the deluge and afterwards. There is a decent amount of shopping available. The island is a duty-free zone, so there were lots of booze shops. No tobacco though, as Colombia actually leads the world in lowering smoking rates amongst its population. Not allowing tobacco to be sold anywhere seems to be an effective way of achieving this. Some fun street art too. And plenty of local boats will take you to nearby quays if you fancy a couple of hours away from the town. There was probably even less English spoken here than in Bogota, except for one of the porters in the hotel who spoke better English than I did. It was really helpful to have someone I could ask questions of, including why all of the ATMs had lengthy queues at all hours of the day and night. It turns out it was payday, and the banking system is a bit ropey on the island, so as soon as anyone is paid, they line up for as long as it takes to get their hands on their earnings.
So San Andreas, time to move on. I've enjoyed my time here, but it hasn't really been what I expected. It seems to be visited mostly by Colombian families in quite large groups at that. And when it's food time, they tend to go to local stalls that have been set up by local entrepreneurs who'll serve food out of kitchen dishes. Now, I'm adventurous when it comes to eating, but that's just a tad too adventurous for me, particularly as I don't speak the language and I'm not going to be sure what I'm getting. And there aren't really bars. Instead, the Colombian visitors go to bottle shops or off licenses, buy what they need, and go and enjoy themselves on the beach. So there's not a lot of accommodation for the international traveller, and there's not a lot of accommodation for a traveller who doesn't speak Spanish. So it's all been a little bit odd, but I have enjoyed myself, and I think it would be a very similar experience if you took a Colombian and plonked them down in Margate or Blackpool. Time for the next flight back to Bogota and then on Aeromexico to Mexico City. I'm actually going to spin my time in Mexico City and in Manchester into a separate video for a couple of YouTube algorithm related reasons I won't go into here. But to wrap up this video, I enjoyed my time in Colombia, although I have to say I'd hoped to enjoy it more. I probably wasn't in Bogota long enough to really get to know the place, and I'd probably allowed my expectations of San Andres to get ahead of me a little too much. The gloomy weather also got in the way in both places. I'd been to Colombia before, to Cartagena, and had had a brilliant time there, which probably made me even more annoyed that I didn't really connect with either destination this time. Mexico City was a different story though, and I absolutely loved my time there, so look out for that video which will wrap up my experiences on this trip. So thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. Please give the video a like if you did, please consider subscribing and leave me a comment. Have you been to Bogota? Have I got it right, or did I just not go to the right parts of the city? And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account, the link to which is in the description below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.